What a wonderful morning. So some of you may know that I just got back from a trip. I was down in Mexico City this past week. My cousins got married, and so I went down there, and then I had the chance to spend a few extra days with just my mom and I. We were representing our part of the family. The wedding was amazing. We had no idea why we were in Mexico City because he's a boy from California and she's also from the States, but it turns out they met in Mexico City and have loved it, and now I understand why. The city is just filled with trees everywhere. At some point in the city's history, they realized that if they just planted millions of trees, that it would shade the city, it would make it more comfortable, and that is all true, that when we are walking through the streets, it is gorgeous and it is lush, even as they are in the midst of a drought, though. It's an amazing city. The people were so nice, the museums, the food, it was relatively affordable. So after the wedding, my mom toured the city. We went to the Museo Nacional de Arqueología, the anthropology museum there. It's an amazing museum, and you can hear that my Spanish is amazingly poor. That it is the largest and most visited museum in Mexico. It is in the heart of sort of their equivalent of Central Park. And there are stories and artifacts of so many indigenous groups to the region. So I want to share a thought that came to me while I was there, and I'm looking to dialogue with you after the service as well. So there are so many stories of the indigenous groups of the region, the Mayans, I'm sure we've heard of, and the Aztecs, but also the Olmecs and the Toltecs and the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs, and I'm sure that, again, I'm not pronouncing them correctly either, but there were so many groups that were represented through their artifacts and the stories at the museum. So as I was going through the museum, I kept thinking about parallels in timelines that I'm more familiar with. The Jewish timelines, what was happening there, what was happening in another part of the world. And it was really interesting to do. So the Mayans, roughly 1500 BCE until 900 of the Common Era. Like, they really spanned a long period of time. And the classic period for the Mayans was 200 to 900 of the Common Era. Okay, so 200 to 900. So, okay, well, that's familiar with me. The destruction of the temple was in the year 70 of the Common Era. The Mishnah is dated roughly 60 to 200, so that's right in that period. And the Gemara ends in around 600. So the earliest part of the Talmud is roughly, it looks like, as the Mayans are on decline. Okay, two totally different parts of the world, but I'm familiar with what's happening. So as Saadia Gaon is writing his book, The Book of Beliefs and Opinions, which tried to integrate Jewish theology with Greek philosophy, the Mayans were giving way to the Olmecs and then to the Incas. So the museum presents all of these various groups. And at one point, Mom and I were sitting on a bench in the courtyard, which the exhibit halls are built around. You might have been to the museum. And I realized that the entire museum is celebrating indigenous people of the region. And it kind of struck me, it was kind of hidden in plain sight, that that's actually what is happening here. If anything, the museum downplayed the Spanish Catholic colonization, but through art at other museums and by touring churches everywhere around Mexico, seeing the architecture and hearing Spanish all by itself, you understood that Cortez landing at Veracruz in around 1520, everything would change for that region. But the underlying assumptions of the museum was that indigenous people were to be celebrated. The largest museum in Mexico is focused on highlighting indigenous people, and while I assume society has many inequities towards these groups, there was something interesting to me walking through these vast halls. And then I realized it. The entire way the term indigenous is used regarding Israel and Palestine is completely different than in the museum. See, in regards to Israel and Palestine, it seems to me that the argument is formed on college campuses and in the media that whoever wins the title of indigenous people to the land of the Eastern Mediterranean wins the claim to Israel. It has a win-lose scenario, which I think is actually absurd. Palestinians claim to have been there for generations and centuries, and we point to archaeological sites of synagogues well over a millennia old. Remember, Islam isn't even revealed until the revelation to Muhammad in around 610 of the Common Era, and there are many, many Jewish sites that are far older than that. So this is roughly as late as when the core of the Talmud was being codified, is when Muhammad had the revelation. So indigenous is being defined as who came first. So it's a fight which is denying each other's history and peoplehood. Are we arguing about modern Jewish nationalism of the late 1800s or Palestinian modern nationalism in the 1960s? Are the Palestinians claiming to be the descendants of the biblical Canaanites or Hittites or Girgashites, which they are not, who were in the land before Joshua entered the land? I don't think so. The argument is simply being deployed in order to undermine the modern reality that Israel's right to exist is not acceptable to so many other people. Deploying sophisticated, virtue-laden philosophies from afar is an attempt to undercut the real issues, which is that we have to find a way to live together. Arguing that the modern state of Israel does not have the right to exist because of arguments of indigenous claims makes no sense in America or in Israel or in Mexico. If you want to argue that, then here in Bethesda, this land was once part of the Anacostan tribe, the same people who named the Anacostia River. And just to our west, meaning Cabin John or Carter Rock, right, towns just right next door, that was the land of the Piscataway tribe. So so if we apply the same argument of indigenous claims which people want to overlay to Israel, should we leave our homes here? But more, we do have responsibilities to these tribes in some way. So we do need to recognize that we are not the first people here, and we are not the last people here either. My point is that fighting over indigenous status completely misses the point. It is framed as whoever wins should rule the land. The reality is people are there. Israel is there. The Arab countries have continually fought against the existence of Israel. The Arab countries have continually neglected the Palestinian people and the opportunities to create a Palestinian state alongside Israel. And Israel has far too long made the conditions on the ground increasingly difficult to create the Palestinian state. The expansion of settlements throughout the West Bank only makes the situation more volatile. So sitting in Mexico City, away from the pressures of the news and the arguments, I was reminded of what needs to be our true goal: a safe and secure Israel alongside our Arab brethren. It sounds like a crazy ideal and dream at this moment, but maybe that's the perfect time for a crazy dream. The creation of Israel was not built to deny others statehood. It is in Israel's interest for Palestinians to build a civil society of tolerance and uplifting its people, for Palestinians to be prosperous, but Palestinians, Israelis, Saudis, Jordans, others must also steer Palestinian society away from decades of hate towards Israel and the Jewish people. The culture of hate is what led to October 7th massacres and to this war. The argument of who is indigenous or who is more indigenous is a futile argument. It is designed to undermine the legitimacy of Israel. As I was sitting in the museum courtyard, I wondered if there would ever be a similar museum of indigenous people in Haifa, which would equally celebrate all the people of the land. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. These are the words from the book of the Torah, which we will begin this afternoon, the book of Leviticus. These words, the state of the world, moving beyond hate and war and disillusionment and dehumanization, seems far off from where we are right now. But as I was sitting on the bench in the courtyard of the museum, I was reminded of what the dream actually is. Shabbat Shalom.